Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Convo Couch. I am Fiorella Isabel, and I am here with three really interesting guests. Some of them I know and some of them I don't. Lainie Petersen, who is on Hard Lens Media and is a leftist. I have also Skye Daddy, or Coin Daddy, on Twitter. And you're an independent, right? I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then I have a conservative, Olivia Rondeau, who very nice to meet you. I've never had you on before, but I'm interested to hear your viewpoints, all of your viewpoints together on this specific issue. So welcome.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me on.
Thank you.
And so I kind of want to start off with like the big elephant in the room. What's been happening the last few weeks, maybe up until the last month or so, with the trucker convoy, because for me, I consider myself pretty far left, and it was extremely disappointing and extremely infuriating seeing a lot of these so-called communists and so-called socialists really rag on these working class truckers taking the initiative to protest against medical tyranny and against these mandates, which are going to usher in much more of the surveillance state and much more authoritarian, like era that we're going into. And if you recognize that, and if you see that, it just seems so counterproductive, and it was really infuriating to me. So I wanted to hear your perspectives as to whoever wants to go first, as to how you all felt about how you feel about the trucking convoys and what you feel like what your reaction is to how the left reacted to it.
If I could just say that it is refreshing to hear people on the left be mad at a lot of the vocal people on the left for not reacting to this in their appropriate manner. I miss when liberals, leftists, and progressives were the people who were against the surveillance state, who were against the tyrannical overreach of, I guess, fascist dictators. I feel like it's the same people who were calling Trump a fascist dictator for 4 years who are now praising Justin Trudeau and kissing his boot and praising the manner in which he is oppressing these truck drivers and people participating in the convoy. Now people's bank accounts are being locked. They've just announced that people's pets will be taken away. If you are arrested being a protester or participating in the convoy in any way, they will take your pets. And we all know that the state is not just housing pets, they're going to put them down. It's literally insane. And thank you again. It is refreshing to hear people on the left side of the aisle speaking up against this, because I don't want the conservatives to have a monopoly on speaking out against tyranny. I think that's stupid, and I think we should all be united on this.
I'm pretty horrified, if I may. I'm just absolutely horrified. And I was introduced as a leftist. I consider myself a little more independent, but I'm absolutely horrified by what the rhetoric that I've been hearing over the past few years, coming from so-called Democrats, so-called leftists, or liberals or progressives, whatever they want to call themselves, and this sneering regard for people in the trades, working class people, truck drivers, and demonizing these individuals as being too ignorant to know what's good for them. And it's been very upsetting to me, particularly since the Trump presidency, and I did not support Donald Trump at all, but to this kind of sneering attitude. And this has really been carried over, I think, into the rhetoric of the pandemic with regards to things like lockdowns, mask wearing, or vaccinations or treatments. And there's this very anti-working class, anti-poor people, anti-people who do not have college educations attitude that I've been seeing specifically among the people who are supposed to be championing these groups.
Yeah. Skye, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, 100% agree, especially with them knowing what's best. And I feel like they did that with the Black community as well. Anytime you speak out against their narrative and you want chuck and jive for the left, they want to go ahead and be like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Oh, you're ignorant. I know what's best for you. And it's the same thing with working class white people. It doesn't matter what it is. They're adopting this, I know what's best for you. And it's funny because they're getting what's best for them straight from the establishment. So you're anti-establishment, but when working class people are fighting for their own rights, you're trying to regurgitate these narratives. And I'm not surprised at all anymore. Because these people really have anyone who thinks that they're going to get changed through the system, they're not worried about what happens to people who actually go outside the system and their consequences. So you think that if you were really anti-establishment and you planned on being outside of the system and rebelling against it, you would go look at these things like, oh, they're going to kill pets. Oh, they're going to freeze bank accounts. Oh, they're going to do all these things. You think you'd be against them because if I go out the system, even if I don't agree with this view right here, they're going to do it to me as well. But it just further shows me and validates that these people have no plans on actually going against the system, or they're just so dumb. For some reason, they're thinking that if they fight for whatever they fight for, it's not going to happen to them. And I think it's hilarious that so many of these people are calling themselves communists and, oh, it's all about the proletariat, it's all about the working class. But then they're literally cheering on the authoritarianism with their fucking foot on the working class neck. It is just I'm not surprised, but it just validates what I already knew from the beginning of this with leftists. Or with whatever they call themselves leftists. I just call them Democrats.
Yeah, there's this elitism, and I think I wanted to touch on that because all of you touched on that a little bit. Like, there's this arrogance and this elitism that I think the Democratic Party initially adopted, right? And then, of course, the progressives, who are like their children, decided to take in as well. And there's like this elitism where, if, for instance, if you call yourself a communist and you try to talk, a lot of these people when they try to talk to people, they say, well, if you don't read theory, then I don't care about your opinion, essentially. Like, they're very arrogant and they're not living in the reality of a working class person that has to work XYZ jobs and has all this medical debt and whatever it is, and is living in this situation. They're more so interested in feeling good about themselves and saying how they're for BLM, how they're for this and that, but without actually living in those circumstances. And that elitism, I think, is what lost a lot of the Democrats the votes throughout the decades. And that's why Donald Trump won. If you recall, in 2016, even Bernie Sanders was talking to the white working class in the South and the Midwest, and a lot of those people were voting for him. But the minute that Hillary Clinton rigged the election, what happened is those people went and they voted for Donald Trump. I wanted to hear you guys comment on how that has factored in where we're at today.
I mean, you just kind of spelled it out. The Democrats left the white working class in the dust. Whether they meant to do it on purpose or not, what they effectively did was replace the white working class, or just middle America in general, regardless of race, with a bunch of social issues that they generally don't care about and that generally don't affect them. Middle class white people, or working class white people, they didn't care about the BLM, and they didn't care about all this like critical race theory stuff that the Democrats have made their pride and joy at the moment. I don't think they're racist, but they just didn't care about it. And so when it's being shoved down their throats and all this white privilege stuff is being shoved down their throats, they take that as, okay, well, they just don't care about me. So I think that the false narrative that a lot of middle America is just racist, and that's why they voted Republican in 2016, and that's why they supported Trump again in 2020, that definitely pushed people away. And so I can see this similar thing happening up in Canada right now, where people have been called racist for supporting the truckers. People have been called terrorists and Nazis for supporting the convoy. And it just goes to show, again, the liberal elitism that takes place when people are criticizing the convoy, not realizing that the convoy is keeping them from eating right now. It's all these liberals up in the city talking about, oh, these no good, inbred, uneducated, racist truckers, just wanting to spread the coronavirus around, not realizing that their whole country, especially Canada, which is very less densely populated than America, is only running on truckers. So yeah, it just shows the elitism. It just shows the fact that they've pushed these people away with slurs, calling them racist and terrorists and uneducated, and it's really backfired on them.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think one big thing is people who say they're in a working class movement trying to make everything about race. Like, that's never going to work. Like, we have to be able to connect on issues that everyone cares about and be able to make change that are positive for everyone without trying to put in shame and guilt. So I honestly think most of the Democratic Party, most of their, what they're trying to do is just use social justice warrioring to push their agenda. And it has nothing to do with the working class. So I think we're going to see a huge, huge red wave. It's going to be insane.
I guess like shifting a little bit more, and I'll start with Lainie, shifting a little bit more into the side effects of COVID, which are never discussed, right? There's a lot of reasons why people are anti-mandate for whatever reason they have, but mental illness and other illnesses coming out of the pandemic have affected a lot of people. Suicide rates have been up, depression in children has been up. And this is something that's completely largely ignored by the mainstream media and even by independent media largely. And so Congress ignored their duty by having a mandatory joint session every 6 months. So they're supposed to have a joint session every 6 months in which they tell the American people, like, what are the data and the side effects of lockdowns? And so as pertaining to the lockdowns, was the risk worth it, in your opinion, the reward, or was it too damaging? And did it have a negative psychological impact on Americans? And should our politicians be held accountable for what's happening now?
Yeah, one of the first things on Hardlands Media, my show's on Thursdays, and it's subtitled Civically Minded, because my feeling is that politics really starts at the sidewalk. And even though you and your neighbor may not share a religion or social beliefs, or you do share a sidewalk, and we have to find ways to civically engage with each other. And at the very beginning, I was talking to some public health experts that I knew, and they said, well, here's the problem. People go into quarantines. We were calling them quarantines back then, but lockdowns and quarantines is that they create as many problems as they solve. And you have to have a look later on to figure out what has been working and what is not. And what I was pointed out was that people die of drug overdoses, people die from withdrawal, domestic violence is on the increase, mental health issue, child abuse. These are things that are happening, and people not being able to get to their doctors. And specifically, a whole lot of people with significant mental health conditions were no longer able to see their therapists. And they were forced into Zoom meetings if they even had access to Zoom. But mental health professionals can find it difficult to necessarily really gauge or assess a person's condition. And many people who, I know a person who has a very specific, very serious dual diagnosis. And for him, while he was stabilized with his medication and he was able to get that, therapy was not working online. And so we may have slowed the spread, which I think was probably important, at least at the beginning when people didn't know what was going on. But after a while, we have to come back and look at what has happened to people's minds. We've got a lot more violence going on. People were engaging what I would call popping off behaviors, getting into fights and altercations because they were stressed and extremely tightly wound. So I think that the failure to come back and look at these issues and assess, not based entirely on the spread of a virus, but all of these other public health concerns, including cancer screenings. Why wasn't that done? Why wasn't that addressed? And I'm very fearful for what we're going to be seeing with people who cannot catch up after this damage has been done to them.
Yeah. Does anybody else want to comment on like perhaps the side effects on children being locked up in classrooms with masks? And we've seen the hypocrisy, politicians not wearing them and kids having to wear them, or like going to a restaurant and you go sit down at the restaurant and you remove your mask, but like they have to sit with the mask like 20 like the entire time they're in school, and just like not being able to go to their extracurricular activities. I know my sister was in high school and they canceled like their prom and all of these things that normally they look forward to doing. And social interaction is so important. And this generation in particular is already on the internet a lot. So it's just kind of a lot of things that aren't being talked about.
One thing I would point out is that there was, and I reported on it earlier this year, there was a study, I believe out of Columbia, that was showing developmental delays in infants that had been born. Now, this, again, their brains are very plastic. They may be able to catch up, but again, not every child will. And if we also want to talk about schools and masking and of course class differentials, while there were lockdowns here in the Chicago area, there were some schools in the suburbs that were open for childcare. And those who could afford to pay $250 per week per child could send their children to school. They would be supervised while doing their online lessons at desks. So the inequities were very present at that point. And again, people had no problem sending these kids to school or being in a building together as long as their parents could pay $250 per child per week.
Yeah. And I'll go with either Skye or Olivia. What are your thoughts on how differently the left versus the right feel about mandates? Why do you think there has been largely, I would say more, at least in the United States, right? We can only speak to this country. In the United States, has been largely, it's been coming from the right, the pushback against these mandates versus the left, which is at one point it was, anti-censorship, anti-surveillance state, and anti-authoritarian.
Well, I think for the left, it's just because they take their talking points straight from CNN and the left influencers. So when they were saying all these, too weak to stop the spread, if you look at the left and you tell them go against their beliefs about COVID, all they're going to do is repeat to you, people are dying. This many people died. Whatever they heard on CNN or whatever, Kyle Kalinske or whatever, they're just going to repeat that. And that's why the left just really is so easily regurgitates what they hear. So it's anything that you really want the left to believe. If you just get enough celebrities to say it that they like, they're just going to believe it. So I think, Fox News and the other right-wing influencers were more skeptical as well. So I think the right was just always going to be skeptical of, anything that Biden had to say, which I agree, you should be.
100%. And also vaccines have been, I think, falsely painted as a left versus right partisan issue. Or basically, if you're anti-vax, I would say you're painted as a Republican, far right, even racist. Like people think you're a white nationalist and they associate all these negative things with you. If you are a quote unquote anti-vaxxer, for the record, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I think that there are different nuances that come with different vaccines, but I don't even know anyone who hasn't taken the COVID vaccine who hasn't taken any other vaccines. I think it's different for a lot of people. But unfortunately, you're only allowed to think that way if you're on the right. If you're on the left and you think that way, then they will literally banish you. And I've seen it happen. I don't make friends based on politics or, I don't make friends based on voting for the same person I vote for. So I'm friends with quite a lot of people on the left side of the aisle of politics. And several of them have told me that they feel vaccine hesitant, but they're not allowed to say it to their other more, activist or social justice warrior left-leaning friends. And I've had several conversations like this, and it's really, really sad. So while a lot of people on the left side of the aisle, I'll give it to them, are internally hesitant about the mandates and are internally feeling a type of way about the forced vaccinations and the forced masking, especially in public schools and with children, especially when they see politicians not even wearing the masks, they're not going to say it out loud because they've been literally banished and exiled. So to Skye's point, a lot of people in charge, kind of in charge of the left are celebrities, are people who have been paid to say what they're saying, are influencers, are people who don't really care about the general outcome of things, but people will take their talking points. And that's not to say that the right doesn't take their talking points. There's a ton of talking points on Fox News that I disagree with, but it just so happens that on this issue, it turns out that the right has kind of taken control of the anti-tyranny and small government and liberty narrative. And again, I don't want the right to have a monopoly on that. I think that human rights are important and everybody should care about them.
Yeah, and that's also being used by the left to discount all of that, right? When we talked about, for instance, the general election, or we talk about election integrity, all of a sudden, for years, the left has been fighting for election integrity, and Bernie Sanders is one example of what happened to him. And then all of a sudden, now election integrity is a right-wing issue. January 6th, what happened then? The left has been talking about taking over the government and doing some sort of radical protesting, and which wasn't even an insurrection. January 6th was not an insurrection, but it just the way it was painted as one by a lot of the left that normally cheered it on and is anti-cop, and they were cheering for the murder of Ashley Babbitt because all these people there were suddenly Nazis. So now doing that is considered right wing. Challenging elections is considered right wing. So then, of course, came the COVID narrative, right? So now we're into the COVID narrative where, okay, so challenging the status quo is now anti-science because the liberals made science a religion. Just I criticizing the Christian fundamentalists constantly. They made a fundamental religion out of believe in science. And so then there was this whole like aspect where it's like, okay, well, now you can't question the big pharma, even though for years they've been questioning big pharma. I mean, the largest actual anti-vaxxers for years were liberal hippie women, like that didn't want to vaccinate their children. But all of a sudden now it's a right-wing thing. So what's been happening is they've been using the establishment, the national security apparatus has been using these things to sort of paint them as these right-wing narratives. And the word freedom is now a right-wing narrative. You can't say, if I go out there and I'm with a bunch of progressives and I say, I believe in freedom, they're going to call me a right-winger straight up because you can't, now that word
freedom
is painted forever. So freedom is bad now. It's a very, very Orwellian situation we're living in. But yeah, it's crazy. And you guys touched on a lot of these points. So just to all of you, like overall, what do you think is going to be the Biden response? Because we know that the truckers took off from Barstow this morning and headed for DC. And I already know several people in LA are already, the anti-fascists are filming them. Oh, these right-wing, blah, 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 look what they're doing. And so my question to you all is, how will Biden handle the truckers now? If there is some sort of huge crowd drawn towards DC, what consequences can we expect? Whoever wants to answer first.
I think it could be the same thing in Canada, exercising special limited power, aka it looks like martial law to me. I think that could easily be worst case scenario. Maybe not week 1, maybe not week 2, but the media is going to spin it. They're going to make it a way bigger crisis than it is. They're going to blame them on the supply shortage, even though we've been having supply shortage and problems all this time. And yeah, I really do think they're going to extend military and government power because of this.
I think that people are going to act like it's January 6th part 2. I think that they will call it an insurrection. They will call it terrorism. They will use that as an excuse to exercise more government power. I agree when Skye said they're going to use it to say that this is the reason why there's a supply shortage, even though everyone knows that there are supply chain shortages for multiple reasons, most likely to do with government overreach in the first place. But of course, they're going to blame it on the small people, on the working class, and it'll give more power to the right. I think it'll contribute to the incoming red wave, but at what cost? Like me, as somebody who is pro incoming red wave, I'm like, at what cost? Honestly, at what cost? Because I think what we're going to see is police brutality. I think we're going to see police, pulling truckers out of their trucks. I hope this doesn't happen. I pray it doesn't happen. But if it's anything like Canada, then we're going to see it happen. And I don't think it'll be as bad as Canada. I tweeted this, I think, yesterday or the day before. The only reason we're not already at Canada level is because America is more heavily armed. But, going into DC, you can't be armed there. So maybe it'll play out differently than what I had hoped. Maybe it'll be even worse.
I agree with what the ladies here have said, and I would just kind of emphasize that I do expect to see the narrative taking on this very elitist and anti-working class rhetoric. We're seeing a lot about that. Talk about troglodytes, mouth breathers, how that kind of rhetoric goes. And that would be what I expect to see. I hope it doesn't come to any of this. I really do. I hope that what happens is peaceful. People are getting their messages out, but I could easily see it being spun.
Yeah, especially with the bulletins issued by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, where they're going to start labeling anybody that counteracts the COVID narrative or talks about the elections in any way as some sort of terrorist. And that started, of course, with January 6th, where they were labeling people as domestic violent extremists. And a lot of people, once again, on the left cheered for it because it wasn't their team. Oz, I think we're going to go on Rokfin only right now because I've got some COVID questions, specifics to ask. So let's go ahead and go on Rokfin only. If you're on the YouTube, please share the Rokfin link because we cannot talk about this on YouTube. Unfortunately, the censorship, this is exactly what we're talking about. The censorship is insane. And they will shut us down. So I'm just going to ask you, it's not going to be for much longer, but I'm going to ask you some questions about what you think is, what do you think of the purpose of this whole thing is? Because we've been covering this for over 2 years. And we started looking at a lot of things early on, but not even some people started looking at it even earlier than we did. And it just, count you down. Okay, so 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.